Welcome to tonight's tale, a fairy tale theater podcast. We are going through every episode of Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater in alphabetical order. I'm your host, Emily, from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm joined by my co-host, Eric.
Hi, it's me, Eric.
And this week we are fortunate to be joined again by our good friend, Doug.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, Doug. This week we are going to be reviewing and recapping the episode, The Nightingale. Eric, do you have any background information on this episode?
Yes, so The Nightingale aired on May 10th, 1983. It was one of the earlier episodes, season 2, episode 2. So it was actually the 4th episode to air. It actually was filmed January 10th, 1983 to January 14th, 1983.
That's a quick turnaround.
Quick. Filmed in 4 days. Done.
So before we go into the rewatch, Doug, I'm going to ask you, what is the first thing that springs to mind when you think of the episode The Nightingale?
This was an interesting one for me because as a kid loving fairy tale theatre, this was one episode I had no interest in watching. And I know it sounds terrible now, but I think back and I think it was because it wasn't a fairy tale I was familiar with. From what I saw, it didn't have any of the elements of a fairy tale that I was familiar with. There was princess and prince and witch and all that stuff that I'd become accustomed to. So, yeah, it was one of those fairy tales that I didn't know about. It's an episode I never saw until I was an adult. But I always knew it starred Mick Jagger. He was front and center on the cover art. I knew him from the Rolling Stones. So I thought it was always going to be an interesting watch when I got around to it.
Of course. For me, I actually did grow up with this episode. And the first thing that springs to my mind is, of course, Mick Jagger. And I was the opposite way around. I grew up, when I found out about the Rolling Stones, I'm going, that's the Emperor from Nightingale. Eric, what do you remember about the Nightingale?
The Nightingale, for me, I will always just think of that creepy bedroom scene, which we'll get to later.
Oh, yeah.
That just pops out in my head.
Traumatizing. The word is traumatizing.
Traumatizing. Very traumatizing. Very scarring. And I was reliving the PTSD during my rewatch.
Same.
Did you see that scene during the CBS Fox preview first?
Yes, during the previews.
So,
yeah, that's when I
that
first
was pretty
saw
much
it. Yeah.
the only reference I had. And yeah, I wasn't a child that was easily scared, but I would say I was unnerved.
I understand now why you weren't eager to see it if you saw that scene as the preview. I had already seen the whole episode. When that preview came, I'm like, out of every scene, that's the one you're using to promote the episode?
Yeah, interesting choice. Well, it left an impact.
So how familiar was everyone with the original fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen? I know I read it when I was a kid. I believe I read it in Hans Christian Andersen's house in Denmark. I know I've read it and I do not remember much about it.
And that's one of those fairy tales that I didn't pick up till much later. For the same reason I didn't watch the fairy tale theatre episode as a kid. I don't think this fairy tale found its way into my life. But when I was older and I was starting to study and read more fairy tales, yeah, I did read this one. And yeah, Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales just had a different tone to them, to the Brothers Grimm that I was more familiar with.
Definitely.
I would say I'm not super familiar. I know that I've read it at some point. I actually know that my brother read this in school because he borrowed this to take to school, to show in school. So I know they taught it in 6th grade, I believe, for him. Quite interesting. It's quite an interesting choice for a 6th grade curriculum, but yeah, I remember that. I remember he asked to borrow it and he brought it to school and they showed it. So
actually, though, after doing my rewatch, I can kind of see how that happened because as I was watching, I'm like, there are some real lessons here that went right over my head as a kid. We'll get to them in a minute, but I can actually see how that could work, although it is thinking outside the box.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a beautiful story.
What do you remember thinking of the episode when you first saw it? Doug, you were a little older when you first saw it?
Yeah, I mean, I really first saw this one, I would have been, I want to say 18, 19. And I just found it just to be such a beautiful episode. The production design is based on Edmund Dulac's illustration from the Hans Christian Andersen stories. And I think this is one of my favorite episodes as far as production design is concerned. It looks so beautiful and so perfect, and the music is also beautiful as well. It was just one of those episodes that took me by surprise. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. And it's one of the episodes that I personally feel is the easiest watch as an adult with different expectations. I really like it now.
Oh, that's an interesting take. Eric, what do you remember thinking of the episode when you first saw it?
I don't think this was ever one of my favorite ones, but I think like Doug, it was very enjoyable on my rewatch. I wasn't bored. I was engaged the whole time. There were some rewatches that we've done that I'm just like, oh, barely making it through. But no, it is beautiful. It's beautifully shot. The costumes, I mean, everything. They created a whole atmosphere for you in this episode. You really felt like you were there, like you were in the porcelain palace and cafe. I felt like it was so well done. I really enjoyed it.
Agreed. I have much more of an appreciation of this episode now as an adult. When I was a kid, I did not get this episode. I did not understand it. It was a bit too out there. Death scared me. I didn't know who Mick Jagger was. I didn't understand. A lot of it went over my head as a kid, but as an adult, I definitely have much more of an appreciation of it. So moving into our recap, it starts, we've got the theme music, which was a lot louder and more awkward. And I wrote down the word clunky than I remembered it. I was not a fan of this soundtrack, oddly enough.
It reminded me of one of those parades with a Chinese dragon at like Chinese New Year. I had that vibe.
I could see that might be where they were going. That might be what they were going for.
Understandably.
Still didn't work for me. I didn't get like a bird singing vibe at all.
I felt the music was fun.
Well, we get our introduction to the music, and then we see Shelley's beautiful introduction.
Shelley.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Welcome to Fairy Tale Theater. Please join us for tonight's tale about an emperor who finds true friendship from a lowly kitchen maid and a plain little bird called the Nightingale.
And this is very early fairy tale theater, so nothing crazy yet with the introduction, nothing where she's in the actual setting of the fairy tale yet. She's just in a blue dress, her hair pinned up. I guess that's supposed to be kind of an Asian reference. I don't know, her hair pinned up. I don't really know, but there really wasn't anything yet where she's, like in Goldilocks with the bees.
Yeah, Shelley had this like shtick toward the end of some of the episodes. It wasn't present here.
Yeah, no, she wasn't there yet. And it was because it was very early. It was very early, but she looked very pretty in her blue dress and she's kind of setting us up. And then we also have Shelley throughout the episode as our narrator and also as the voice of the Nightingale.
It's a Shelley heavy episode.
It is.
Yes, it is.
But she did a beautiful job narrating. I love the episode she narrates. Her voice is very kind of calming and sing-songy. I think she's probably my favorite narrator, and they had some great ones through the years.
I would want Shelley to narrate my life.
Same.
Life goals.
She'd probably take the job. She'd probably get a kick out of it, Doug.
True.
Okay, we get our cast list. And of course, Mick Jagger got top billing. Then we go alphabetical. Bud Cort. Can we take a minute and talk about Bud Cort?
I love Bud Cort. I mean, I mainly know him from Harold and Maude. I think a lot of people would. But you're obviously aware of Shelley's first movie, Brewster McCloud, and he featured heavily in that. And I think they just became friends from that.
Probably. But he was wonderful in this episode.
Oh, yeah.
And Bud Cort, just to note, is a fellow Westchester man. Yes, he was born in New Rochelle and he was raised in Rye. And he went to Iona Prep. He graduated from the same high school I graduated from. So
definitely
very cool.
Your neck of the woods, Eric. Very cool.
Yeah, he's my homeboy. I was always fascinated by him. And I looked him up after years because I was always wondering why he looked this way. He looked very androgynous and like strange in this episode and just his face in general. And I didn't know that he had almost died in a car accident, which caused a lot of his face to have to be reconstructed. That's why he looks so different in this than he looked in Harold and Maude.
Aww.
Okay, I didn't.
Yeah, it's 1979, apparently. He almost died in a car crash. And his face was totally almost reconstructed, almost completely.
Oh, that's...
Yeah.
Thankfully, he survived, and he had such a presence in this episode. What was his character's title? Was it Imperial Master of the Music?
Yeah, I just called him the Music Master, but I think he was officially the Imperial Master of Music.
Okay. Pretty much all of our characters here don't have names. They've got titles.
I'd be very surprised if we don't just refer to him as Bud Cort for the entire podcast.
Probably. My notes say Mick and Barbara everywhere.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we've got the great Barbara Hershey playing the kitchen maid. I think I was in my 30s before I recognized that was Barbara Hershey. She looked so different to me. And I'm very familiar with Barbara Hershey's work. It just took me forever to recognize her in that role. I'm not quite sure why.
Well, she was very prolific in the 70s, and she'd made a horror film called The Entity just before Fairy Tale Theatre, which is a very different film to what we're going to watch today.
Yeah. And, of course, she was a long-term partner of David Carradine, whose younger brother, Robert Carradine, played Aladdin. So there.
One big happy Fairy Tale Theatre family.
Oh, I forgot. Edward James Olmos is in this. That's another character actor that I've seen throughout the years.
I know him mainly from this episode, and in doing some research, I could see that he was very prolific as a character actor. The only credit that I really recognized pre-Fairy Tale Theatre was in Blade Runner.
Yeah, everyone remembers him in Blade Runner. He's done a lot of movies that take place in the South. I think he's part Mexican. As I recall, he played Selena's father in the movie Selena. He's
yes.
one of those character actors that's been around a lot. And the last name I recognized in this was Mako.
Yes, obviously from Conan movies.
Yes. So actually, he was an Oscar nominee back in the day, and I think a Tony nominee. Very high prolific Japanese actor. Now, I remember him from Sidekicks with Jonathan Brandis. That was like, that was like, what, 1992? I'm giving away my age, Jonathan Brandis.
And he's very sadly no longer with us, Mako. He died in 2006.
Oh, that's right.
But the rest of them are still here.
Yes, I think so. Mako had 2 roles here. He played both the gardener and one of the ministers.
Oh, okay.
I believe you're right. I think everyone else is still alive from this episode, which is nice to see. Doug, did you want to give us a little background on the original fairy tale?
Yeah, so this was an original fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, published in 1843. And yeah, as we discuss the episode, I'll chime in with a few little points about the original tale and its comparison with the episode.
Sounds great. We do get our opening, and it starts with the famous line,
This story happened many years ago, but that's exactly why you should hear it now, before it is forgotten. You know, of course, that in Cathay, the emperor was a Cathayan, and all the people around him were Cathayan too.
I remember this vividly in my translation of the fairy tale in China. The emperor is Chinese, and all the people around him are Chinese too.
Correct. Yeah, they changed it to Cathay. I mean, I just know that Cathay is a historical name for northern China. So for some reason, this episode decided to say Cathay instead of China for reasons unknown to me.
My guess is it's probably just a different translation, but I don't know. I do remember that throwing me as a kid.
It does sound more exotic. It does sound more fairy tale.
I agree. We get our beautiful introduction to the set, our porcelain palace. It looks like we've got I believe it's a Thai dancer. And then she leaves and we get a juggler, and it's our slow introduction to the emperor who is watching all this entertainment. And we get a very slow close-up on the great Mick Jagger playing the emperor.
He's got that magnificent moustache, and you'll notice the really long nails as well, and that like high pony braid that he's got.
He looks amazing.
They went all out.
Yeah, and he's there for it. He carries it like a boss. Like, yes, this is how I wake up every day.
Now, you mentioned all those performers. Would this not be, because Bud Cort is there with a gong on his chest, is this not like a Cathayan gong show?
I wrote Bud Cort with his gong. He reminded me of vaudeville with the long hook to take the bad axe off the stage. Yeah, this isn't working. Next. But that was also our introduction, you're right, to Bud Cort, who is just chewing the scenery. He reminded me of David Bowie in Labyrinth with that.
Yes. And look, I'll be honest, I used to think David Bowie in Labyrinth was female, and I used to think Bud Cort in this was female when I was a kid. And I'm like,
I could see that.
Yeah, baby Dougie did not know what androgyny was.
I thought it was David Bowie for a long time in this role.
They might have borrowed the same wig.